Hi, it's Jill at Fabric Garden, and it is time for us to start the Hay Violet block of the month. So the first kits are ready, they can be picked up, or if I'm mailing to you, your kit will be on its way here. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about the fabric. So these are beautiful batiks from Wilmington Prints. And I love working with batiks. The batiks are always printed, or I should say hand dyed and hand printed on a tighter weave fabric. And I just love how the fabric, it doesn't fray as much as regular cotton fabric. It's a little stiffer, so it presses really nicely. The thing to remember about batiks as you're working with your batiks is they are a handmade product. So they are hand dyed, and all the prints on them are actually, they carve the designs onto these wooden blocks that are called chops. And people actually, they put those on their hands, and they actually hand do this on tables in Bali. So because it's hand done, there can be variation throughout the bolt, and it's just a natural patina. So if you see a little something weird, don't worry about it. It's part of the patina of the batiks. I also find the batiks are hand dyed, and the prints are put on them depending on the company. These are done in between 10 and 17 yard increments. And they're laying these out on big tables and working on them. And I do find every now and then there's like a little crease or wrinkle when they're rolled onto the bolt that can be difficult to get rid of. And I just let it be. If I can't press it out, I just let it be. And when I look back, I can't ever find it again. So don't worry about if you can't fully get a little crease or something out, because in the long run, you'll never see it. So month one, so the quilt has this, it looks like diagonal, but this is a straight set quilt. So we're gonna be starting in the middle and working our way outwards. So we're going to be making more blocks in the beginning and less blocks as we move forward, which I kind of like. Let's make lots of blocks while we're highly motivated in the beginning, and less as we start to become a little fatigued. So in the first month, we're going to be making, this is my light block, that's my dark block. I shall find it. Oh, ta-da. Is that my light block? We're going to be making 2 of these light blocks, and then we will be making 8 of the dark colored. So they are both the same block, just the coloring is different. So you're really going to be making just 2, the block is 2 units. So a 1 unit is a rail, which is just 3 strips of fabric sewn together, and the other block is it is an X, which is really cute. So let me first just talk about the rail block. So you will be sewing together 2 different strip sets for the 2 different colorings of the blocks. And it's up to you. Sometimes I press to one side or the other. These blocks are not going to be nesting with any other pieces, so I did decide to press open just to keep my block as flat as possible. But it's up to you how you press. So then when you're cutting your batik, and let me see if I can adjust my camera down a little smidge. Here we go. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, that's back kind of far. Let me try a little more. Okay, here we go. So when you are cutting and you've got your lines, sometimes when you press strip sets, the outer edge of the block of the strip, it can get a little wavy depending on how you press. So when I go to subcut these, I make sure that I am lining up a line of my ruler with one of these center seams versus the outside of the block. So I am literally putting a line on one of these seams, measuring from the edge, and then subcutting. Now, whenever you're subcutting a strip set, you may find that every 2 or 3 cuts, you may need to re-straighten the edge. So when you're laying your ruler on, you want a line on the seam, a line on the edge of the fabric, and then doing your cut. If you find when you put your line on the seam, the edge of the fabric is no longer straight with the edge of your ruler, it's time to re-straighten that edge and move on. And that's very common when you're subcutting strip sets, is re-straightening them on a regular basis. So that is fairly straightforward. Now, the making of the 4 units that look like X's, this is all folded corner. So this, some people call it connector corners. This is a technique where, let me find my little sample. You are drawing a line from one corner to another corner, diagonal across the block, and then you are sewing on that line. So after you sew on the line, that piece flips up. So on this block, you start out with a small square and you do 2 smaller squares and you end up with a unit that looks like this. Now, when you make these, I find the folded corner technique is not always as accurate. So the way I like to do this is I draw the line, and when I sew on it, I like to sew whatever way I'm going to press it over. I like to sew like a thread on that side of the line, so that when I press the fabric up, it is folding on the line. If I sew on the line, my fold is not going to be the line. So then once I fold it up, I look at it from the back. If there's anything sticking out, I trim that off. And then I look at how well did that top piece fold over. Sometimes I've made a choice when I'm making a quilt to only cut out, because once you fold it over, you end up with 3 pieces of fabric: your back, your front, and a center piece. And sometimes I only cut that center piece because my back is always accurate, but this block would have so much bulk. It would just be too bulky for quilting later. So you will need to trim off the back 2 pieces, leave just the front. So then we're going to use these pieced pieces as our next folded corner. So we'll be taking a regular square. We will be marking the diagonal line on the back of our pieced piece. So we'll be marking it from light corner to light corner. And then we will be, with our bigger square, we will be putting that on, sewing, and folding it up. So when we fold, let's fold one up, and let me fold the other one. And you can see when we use this pieced unit as a folded corner, that is how we get our X. So the construction of the X is not difficult. They're just squares, folded corners. How well the X will turn out for you just has to do with how accurately you cut your squares and how accurately you mark that line from corner to corner and your sewing. So you may want to use a little bit of scrap fabric and try this technique and see, do I sew on the line, a thread to the right of the line? Where do you get that good fold over on this technique? So once you have all your rails sewn and subcut and you have your X's made, you are just going to sew, an X, a rail and an X, and then a rail and a center square and a rail, X, and then you are going to sew the 3 rows together. Now in terms of pressing this, I don't think there was any pressing instructions in here, and I like to try to keep my block as flat as possible. So I found that if let me find my piece here. When I'm sewing the pieces together, press toward the rail. So normally when I have a blank center block, my instinct is to press to the blank block, and then I would press outwards from the corners. But this is a lot of seams out here in the corner, whereas the rail is pretty flat. So I pressed away from the center block and then towards the rail on the top and the bottom, nested. And then when I sewed the 3 rows together, I found that it really liked to be pressed to the center block. I tried both ways. I tried pressing the seams open, but I found it really didn't matter which way I went. It was very flat either way, and so I ended up pressing the rest of mine toward the 3 rows toward the center. So that is what you need to do this month. So my recommendation is, when you get your kit and you have your pattern, get yourself a binder, get yourself some sleeves so that you can keep your pattern in your binder. So your first month, you'll get a picture of the quilt. You will get, I have some extra things in mine. You will get a color fabric key, and you will get your pattern. And I love it is full color with what blocks you're making and which fabrics you're using. And again, oops, I've got 2 pieces together here. Oops, I didn't do a good job putting them in. But you've, got your full color with pictures. So when we printed your patterns for you, we printed them single-sided. We thought that way you can lay your pieces out and not be having to flip them over all the time. So organize your patterns so that they're always somewhere where you can find them. I do find it's helpful once I have some blocks made, if I have either a project box or a project bag to store my blocks in, or my kits that I haven't started sewing yet. That way everything is all in one spot and I know just where it is when I have time to sew. The other thing I try to do is, I find for me, because I work full-time, having things prepped when I get home, I can just sew. So as quickly as possible when I get a kit, I cut all my pieces and label them. And that way, if I have 20 minutes here, a half hour there, I've already have pieces cut and labeled, and I can sit down and do a little bit of sewing. Whereas if I go up to my sewing room and I haven't cut anything and I only have 10 minutes or 20 minutes, I feel like I don't like to cut when I'm rushed, and so I end up, not being able to use that time. So I think if you get yourself organized, cut your kit as quickly as possible and label your pieces, when you do have time, you'll be able to make progress and keep going. So If you have any questions, always feel free to call me at the shop, 916-483-2955. I'm not usually here on Mondays, but during the week, give me a call and I can answer your questions. And I notice most of you are fairly local, so maybe we can set up a few in-store sewing days to work together. So have a great time working on this first block, and give me a call if you have questions. Thanks.